Um, Thank you for coming to this podcast today. Ruben Díaz Jr., former military linguist, submarine Navy veteran, current interpreter, and world languages educator. Uh, Thank you for being here today.
My pleasure.
I wanted to talk to you about your experience in the military as a military linguist. What was your experience when you were dealing with a multicultural and multilingual population?
And so I came into the profession the way the military does a lot of things, which is with no prior training. And I was also very young when I got stationed. I was then sent to Cuba because I started off as an electronics guy and met some linguists, and then realized and was informed and told that you can actually make a language, the language thing, a career, which I had no idea that was even a possibility. So I started through that process of being a submarine guy, and then I ended up in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, in 1994 when they had all the Cuban refugees and the Haitian refugees that were coming over. So that was really, other than growing up in New York, when you're exposed to a lot of people from a lot of different countries.
Right.
So I think that all those experiences really were the catalyst that allowed me to really be sympathetic about somebody else's plight. So, and how the lack of language, I had gone through that myself as I came here as a non-English speaker.
Yeah.
My learning process
Sink or swim.
It was a sink or swim system or program where they put a kid who doesn't speak English into, you're integrated into an English speaking classroom, figure it out. So I think that experience, that personal experience, allowed me to be really sympathetic to the fact that people who are coming to this country don't always know the language. And people saying, hey, you're in America, why don't you speak English? It allowed me to understand that because I had gone through it myself, and then relate when I was then started becoming a linguist, or started working as a linguist. It gave me that opportunity. So I think that was really the catalyst. My own personal experience growing up, moving to this country, learning English, and so forth and so on, really was what allowed me the opportunity to really launch into sort of that path to becoming a full-time linguist. In the military, you don't have an option. Right? You don't have an option whether you want to do translation or interpretation. You have to do both.
Yeah.
And you have to do both well.
Yeah.
Right?
It's part of your duty.
If you are a better interpreter, then you have to work and
on
you
the
do
other
that
skill.
better, and you're not such a good translator, then you focus on becoming a better translator so you can get your skills up. If you're a better translator and not such a good interpreter, then you have to work on that skill. And so a lot of it is really that. Is that multicultural piece. I come from an island that has every shade.
Yeah. Yes.
Race-wise, right?
Yeah,
We have
Puerto Rico.
We're multiracial. Then growing up in New York City, then you become multicultural.
Yeah.
Right? So, and then multinational because you have every nationality. So you have cultures, languages. So I think all those experiences,
all that awareness
really was really great because I didn't realize that I was going to be drawing on those experiences later on in life. Because I was like, oh, well, I remember reading this or meeting people from here or that kind of thing. So I think that was really crucial in establishing some of the foundational things that I needed to then becoming a much better linguist later.
Yeah. So you were you were practicing culturally congruency and culturally responsibility without even knowing.
Correct.
It was not a thing back then.
Correct.
Which now we call culturally awareness and culturally responsible in educational. It was not a thing, but you were practicing it. That's what it is. That's what we need to focus on nowadays too, because a lot of people do not have that exposure.
Right.
So that's very important. So as a military linguist, and I'm focusing on the military linguistic part of it. I know you are currently also an interpreter and a world language educator, but it is important to me to focus on that because, like you said, there is a lot of ramifications in the military world, you know, that you get to see literally like the reality of the need, you know, for an interpreter and how important that piece of the puzzle is to connect a lot of things. So what kind of challenges do you experience as a military linguist? And do you think that there has been differences? You talk about immigration, you talk about different cultures. So do you think there has been any differences between the challenges that you faced back then to the challenges that you are faced with now that you are currently working as well as an interpreter?
I would say most definitely. I mean, there's always going to be, in every profession, I think there's always going to be challenges. So, and some of the challenges haven't changed, right? The lack of education about the profession, about what interpreters and translators do. Because people don't have that knowledge and we don't educate, right? And there's also the perception for a long time, people just thought that interpreters were just bilingual people.
Right, like
Right?
whatever, whomever that speaks another language can interpret.
Correct. So
You
it
know,
was anybody who
any
speaks
ad hoc.
multiple language
Yeah.
Is an interpreter. And that's not the case.
That's like the
we've learned-
qualification.
correct.
Check.
Oh, bilingual, boom, interpreter. No. There's a
Right.
whole bunch of, in previous conversations that we have had, we've talked about the fact that, yes, there's an educational piece, but there's also a training piece. You know, I literally had to do training and certificates and all this kind of stuff so I can become a better interpreter.
Right, because we were talking about the importance of keeping updating. You know, updating constantly. You have to update constantly.
Right.
Because the challenge that a lot of people get is that they don't update their language skills. Right. And the language is constantly evolving. So I can see how that can be so very, very important. Yeah.
Because language is constantly changing, language is dynamic, so it's going to constantly be changing. There's constantly new words with new generations. There's new slang. There's all kinds of things that it's constantly changing. If you're not on top of that, right, you're not going to serve your clients well.
Correct.
So you have to be able to maneuver the change in register, the change in terminology, the change. I might do a medical or two medical appointments in the morning and be in court in the afternoon. So it depends. A lot of freelance or people that have small language businesses like myself don't always, you don't get to, we do what's needed. So it's important to understand that all those are part of the challenges. If you're not a person that could change very quickly, that can adapt, it becomes very difficult. That also becomes very challenging. So another thing that is, when you take it now, this concept globally, I'm just talking about Latinos. You're from Mexico. I'm Puerto Rican. Right? I can't use, if I'm saying I'm getting on a bus, in Puerto Rico it's me monto en la guagua.
Right.
You can't say that in Mexico, right? Because guagua in Mexico is child. So whoa, wait a minute. That's
how in the world?
What is he saying? Correct. So you have to be aware of who your client is. And I'm thinking of something that just happened in the last few days for us. A kid comes from Mexico. Everybody thinks he speaks Spanish.
Yes, everybody thought, oh yeah,
he's a Spanish speaker, right? Not realizing that there's over 100 native languages spoken in Mexico, right? In Mexico proper,
right?
And he speaks another language, which is an indigenous language. Spanish
Mixed
is not even. It's difficult. I know how difficult that is. I've experienced that. So I think that when I look at things in the profession, in the interpreting profession, I always go back to my personal experiences, because it's easier to be empathic,
Yeah.
and have empathy with the people that with your clients, because you understand what that process was like.
Yeah.
And you understand what they're going through, and you understand what they're feeling. I don't know exactly what they're feeling, but I can relate to it because I went through something similar.
Yeah. So that brings me to the next thing. Do you think we as interpreters can achieve social justice, that we take a role on that, that we can be advocates for the people that we serve as interpreters?
I think there's a place for that. We just have to be cautious that it doesn't. To me, that's a very fine line. And I remember when I first started in this profession, I was a military guy, so I was about, we were taught to be a conduit.
Right.
So there's different roles that we go through as interpreters. So I always thought, as a conduit, my job is to say what you're saying to the person, and then wait for the response and say it back. So my mentality has changed over the years, because I have found, and I just went through this earlier this week, where I had to stop the interaction that was happening between the provider and the patient, which I was removed from, in the sense that I was trying not to even visually be so they can connect. I had to say, okay, time out. Interpreter has a question. You asked this question. The patient responded this way. I think that the words that I used gave the patient the wrong context. And then I said, can you ask your question again? So I had her ask the question again. I've reformulated what I said, so I could make sure that the patient was getting the right question, so she can give. They happen to be a female patient, so she can give the right information, so the provider can have the information that she was looking for, versus, that's advocacy.
That is advocacy,
right? That's not. I stepped out of my role as an interpreter. I had to recognize that there was an issue, right? I had to read everybody. That's advocacy.
Right.
If I look at things like that from the light of, can
you affect change? Absolutely.
Can I cause that patient to be hurt?
Harm, yeah.
Could I cause harm because I'm more interested in making sure that I look good, rather than the patient is getting the right thing. So the right, that the provider is getting the right information.
Right.
So it definitely is directly connected to the health outcome of that patient. And you got to get to that place where it's less about you and it's more about the patient.
We see this type of situations in education a lot of times, more than we can think, which is the utilization of ad hoc interpreters and children. Have you seen, children being used as interpreters, or just like a random person being called for to fit in that role?
I've seen children that are familial, so part of that family. I've seen children who are not part of that family.
Oh my.
So it's somebody else's child who's brought in to interpret for this person, because next door neighbor has a niece or a daughter, or blah blah blah, or a son. I've seen janitors. I've seen housekeeping at a hospital. You kind of see it.
Like you speak Spanish. Come.
See it. Oh yeah. You speak Spanish. Oh yeah, I speak a little Spanish. It's not even like I'm a Spanish speaker. It's I speak a little Spanish. Okay, you come. I see it. I've seen it. I've seen it here.
Yeah.
I've seen it here at the high school.
Yeah.
And I just shake my head.
But I think that there's a very delicate line, because we know what the law says, and we know, because we are educated in the matter, we're experts in it. So because we know that there's laws, regulations, there's in the medical field we have HIPAA law, which prevent people from disclosing certain medical information to whomever is not, has the right to know. And in education, we have FERPA. We can't
Right.
violate FERPA, you know. So if you are not part of the people that information should be disclosed to, then you have absolutely no business, you know, knowing certain things. So it's a fine line.
And
Uh-huh.
let me correct something you just said. You
Mm-hmm.
said you you can't violate FERPA
Mm-hmm.
was your statement.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you shouldn't
You shouldn't.
violate
You shouldn't
FERPA.
violate FERPA.
So it's again lack of education. That's one of the challenges. Is if you are not constant about educating and updating and being part of organizations or getting like getting a certificate
Yeah.
or learning or surrounding yourself with people that are on top of
Mm-hmm.
right, then the advocacy issue, that's part of advocacy.
Correct.
You being familiar with what's going on in our profession and what the laws are and familiarizing yourself, I think that's all part of that advocacy work.
Mm-hmm.
It's important to know that.
Yeah.
So it's important to, you can also
Mm-hmm.
advocate that way. It doesn't necessarily mean so is advocacy important? Absolutely, but there's advocacy
It's
on multiple levels.
right.
So it's important to find what's the appropriate level for you, what's
Mm-hmm.
your level of comfort.
Right. Yeah. So you will agree on me that you are the original influencer.
That's funny. That's funny.
Yeah, you are influencing, in your realm of capabilities, being an advocate and putting yourself, sometimes even in the shoes of the people that you are trying to give this service to, because all the experiences that you have got in your own life, being, you are multicultural, multilingual, culturally aware, you serve um, different populations in your profession. You can be serving one day a super rich and famous, and then the next day you can be serving, a person that's getting evicted from their home. So
Sure.
that, I think that having seen all the sides of society um, made you an influencer. I have coined you as an influencer. Mm-hmm.
A lot of the things that I do are prescribed because
Mm-hmm.
I want a particular outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And if I have tried something and it didn't work and I got a negative outcome, I will never try that again.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm like, I tried this. Now, that might change depending on who the audience is.
Correct.
But that's part of being that
Constant
lifelong
learning.
learner.
Lifelong learning.
You got to be a
Yeah.
lifelong learner.
Mhm.
And what works for high school kids doesn't work for college kids, doesn't work for adult learners because all those learning principles are different.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important to
Be flexible
think
and
and at the end of
morph,
the day, for me,
adapt.
educators have been the people that have had
The most
they're
influence.
not paid well enough,
Mm-hmm.
but they have had the largest amount of influence
Mm-hmm.
and effect
Mm-hmm.
on people are really the teachers. So when I think about the things that I do, that's how I view it. Is I want to set an example of what certain behaviors, certain actions, certain things that I say, and not only what I say, but how I say what I
Yes, that is
say is
true.
important.
That is true. Very, very true. We can get on the topic of teaching students that have faced trauma, which I've recently been studying about, and you don't even know the way that your words and actions may uh, influence somebody's behavior, either with a good or a bad outcome, because we don't know what everybody is carrying behind their shoulders.
Right.
So that's something very, very real, very real. So I know we can talk. We have so many topics that we would like to talk about, but
This is a podcast series.
this is a book that we should make it a series. Yes. In closing, not to take more of your time, what would you say to people that would like to become interpreters? Whether it is in the, you have seen it all. So whether it is in the medical, military, judicial, or educational fields, what would you say to those people?
Whoa, that's one. It's very exciting,
Mm-hmm.
right? Regardless of your setting, you never know what you're gonna get.
Mm-hmm.
So it can be very rewarding and fulfilling, just as much as it can be heartbreaking. So it can be very exciting. It can be very heartbreaking. It's forever changing. It's dynamic. You will be challenged. You Education will never stop because because language is dynamic. The profession is dynamic and it's constantly changing.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to take it a step further and you want to challenge yourself, you change your environment,
Mm-hmm.
right?
So you do
And
have to be some kind of an expert on what you're gonna
you have to,
say and
and you
do.
got to
'Cause
study.
you gotta understand
You
it.
got to study. I mean, I remember a couple of years ago, I worked with the United Nations
Mm-hmm.
on a particular project. It was a month long, and I had a 110-page pre-conference study guide.
Right. Gotta know the topics. Yeah.
It,
Imagine that.
I was studying for months
Mm-hmm.
before I even worked.
Mm-hmm.
Before I even uttered one word, I had to study all this terminology. It was insane.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, imagine I got a PDF and I opened it and I'm like, 112 pages.
Wow.
And that was like, oh, just terminology specific for the conference. And I was like, what?
You do have to be
What?
familiar. Yeah.
So here I am, literally like studying like for a test
Mm-hmm.
and writing notes
And your
and
test is gonna be
creating,
an oral test, by
yes,
the way.
and creating like dictionaries and notes. So because the other thing is you can study all you want,
Mm-hmm.
but then when you're interpreting, you don't say, okay, wait,
Let me get
wait.
the.
Give me a minute. I'm going to look this word up. I was doing simultaneous interpreting.
Ooh, yeah.
So there was no stopping.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't like.
You have to
I
be
mean,
very, very
and
fluent.
we were working as teams. So,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of things that go into doing this profession. I think that's what I would say if somebody is not in a program like this, look for a program like this that allows you the opportunity to create a really solid foundation,
Mm-hmm.
but understand that that's not the end of it. That's just the beginning of it.
Yes, it's the
And then
beginning.
it's forever building on that foundation. The stronger that foundation is, my foundations was the military,
Mm-hmm.
right, which was incredibly solid.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's why I've been able to build really well on, and why I like programs like this,
Mm-hmm.
because it keeps my skills sharp. After doing this
So
30
yeah,
plus years, why am I in a class?
right.
If I wasn't interested in continually growing and evolving, why would after 30 years we take a class? I can say, well, I've
Right.
like you keep saying, oh, you've done it all. I haven't done it all.
Yeah. There's more. There's always more.
There's always more.
Mm-hmm.
Like we've spoken about the different things that I've done. I've done all kinds of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I'm, how people used to say, just because I'm bilingual.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
So that has really afforded me to have a really good lifestyle, to earn a good living, and travel,
Mm-hmm.
go to really cool places, and do a lot of things because I'm constantly evolving and I want to challenge myself and do different. Oh, how about it? Let me try this. Oh, that's kind of cool. Let me try that. So you can challenge yourself, and I think that that's important. But it has to begin with establishing a really solid foundation,
Mm-hmm.
and understanding that not only do you not know everything, you will never know everything.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you can learn from people that know more than you do just as much as you can learn from people that just started.
Correct.
Because
yeah.
they might do something that you're like, oh, wow,
Mm-hmm.
that's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to try that. That's
Mm-hmm.
really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
You can
So
learn
be
from
definitely
everybody.
open.
You got to be
definitely
open-minded.
open-minded.
You have to learn from people that are less experienced, that are younger. Everybody has something to offer.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go into it with that mentality, I think that the average person will be really successful.
Yeah. I think that's really, really good words to say to somebody, because sometimes certain situations in life really like humblize you.
Oh,
No
yeah,
matter
it
how
can be
much
really
you think,
humble.
no
Yeah,
matter how much you think you know already, you just don't know until you are, boom, confronted with certain situations, and you're like, yeah.
And you can have all the information in the world, but can you retrieve it when you
Right.
need it?
Right.
So that's great that you know, but if you can't use it when the rubber meets the road, then that information is not really useful.
There you go. All righty. Well, thank you so very much for
my pleasure. My pleasure.
attending this podcast today. And I am looking forward to having you again when we should speak about other different topics that has to do with.
We need to do
with
to continue this process.
we need to continue this process, definitely.
It's really cool.
Well, thank you to everybody for listening, and we shall see you again on, what did we call it? LingCast?
LingCast.
LingCast, the LingCast series. Thank you, Mr. Ruben Díaz Jr., for participating today.